Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Tuesday morning. Lovely to see you, and as always, thank you so much for being with us for our Bible talk for today, as we continue our adventure through the incredible book of Genesis. And without further ado, I'm going to read you Genesis chapter 5. Make sure you're sitting comfortably. Here goes. And bear with me, by the way, I'll try and explain it to you afterwards. This is the list of descendants of Adam. When God created humankind, he made them in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them. He blessed them and named them humankind when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. The days of Adam, after he became the father of Seth, were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. And thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. Seth lived after the birth of Enosh 807 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he became the father of Kenan. Enosh lived after the birth of Kenan 815 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he became the father of Mahalalel. Kenan lived after the birth of Mahalalel 840 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. Mahalalel lived after the birth of Jared 830 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he became the father of Enoch. Jared lived after the birth of Enoch 800 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after the birth of Methuselah 300 years, and other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. Methuselah lived after the birth of Lamech 782 years, had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he became the father of a son. He named him Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands. Lamech lived after the birth of Noah 595 years, had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, explain that one, Vicar. One of the great joys of doing the Bible this way is that we start at the beginning of a Bible book and we work our way through. We get all the passages, both the easy ones and the difficult ones. And the last few days we've had some incredible readings where there's been so much to say, it's just difficult, it's what you leave out. And then you get passages like today, which on the face of it, just become a whole string of names. So in a sense, you when you go through a Bible book from beginning to end, you get kind of the rough with the smooth. And what you have here is a genealogy. And when you first read a genealogy like this, it just comes across as a whole list of names. It just comes across as a bit like reading the phone book or something like that. But actually, if you unpick it a little, it does actually, they can be quite important, and you actually can get some really fascinating things. So I shall try and unpick some things out of this genealogy today. Firstly, genealogies are often used in the Bible as ways of kind of setting the stories in kind of real time, if you like. So at the beginning of Matthew and the beginning of Luke, you have the genealogy of Jesus. And again, it just, on the face of it, just looks like a whole string of names. But unpack it carefully, and if you find it absolutely fascinating, because especially some of the women, they've got the 5 dodgy women in there, and it's all fascinating stuff. And so you can unpick it a bit, and you can get some fascinating things. So what you do get is you do get the whole the stuff. You get the sections in the Bible. You get it kind of set out in real time, if you like, with the names of real people. Okay. So what I'm going to try and do this morning is try and unpick for you a little bit about what's in this. And so just look at it carefully. Firstly, so at the beginning of the chapter, you have that Adam, okay, and that God made humankind, and that God created Adam and Eve. And it's interesting here, is male and female, he created them. People tend to focus that sort of God was that Adam was the one who was created and Eve came from Adam. But what's kind of quite clear is that the book of Genesis is quite that the male and female are both very much created by God. So in a sense, we're kind of equal partners in this. And that's important to say that from the beginning. I think the other thing is, at the beginning, it said, in verse 1, it says, when God created humankind, he made them in the likeness of God. Male and so, in a sense, you get the impression that Adam and Eve were created in the image of God. But what is interesting, of course, Adam and Eve sin, and sin comes into the world. And when it comes here, it goes on to say, where's the bit it says? I'm trying to find it. And then verse 3, it's right. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his likeness, according to his image. So there's a slight subtle change there. With Adam and Eve, before they ate of the fruit and disobeyed God, they were very much, it's very clear they were made in God's image. But when Seth is born, which of course is after sin has come into the world, they're very much made in the image of Adam and Eve. So there's a certain amount of godliness in, if you like, has been left. There's a difference in that. Whereas Adam and Eve were made very much in the image of God, Seth is made much more in the image of Adam and Eve. And again, I think that says something about sin and so on. And actually, we want as much as we can. We want God, and we want to be made in God's image. And we want to do God's work rather than just asking God to bless what we do all the time. The focus should be on what He's done rather than what we do. If you see what I mean. Okay, so there's that. What is this genealogy about? Well, it starts off with Adam and Eve. And essentially, we are moving now into a whole series about Noah and Noah's Ark and so on. So essentially what you have in chapter 5, the purpose of this analogy, apart from what I've already told you about the Adam and Eve and God's image and son Seth and so on, is to set the story of Noah's Ark in real history. So the whole purpose of this genealogy is to set up the story of Noah, which of course we're going to get in the next chapter. So the purpose of this genealogy, whereas Matthew and Luke, it's all about the genealogy of Jesus. This is really about the genealogy of Noah. So what this chapter is really doing is setting us up for the next chapter. Okay. So we've got made in God's image, and we've got the fact that this whole thing is setting up for Noah. Then you've got what's quite interesting is that they all lived very long lives, noticeably about sort of 900 years, most of them there or thereabouts. They seem to have had their children in their 70s and 80s and then lived a long time afterwards. What's that about? Frankly, I don't know. And there've been many speculations. They do seem to live a lot longer before the flood than they do after the flood. So the antediluvian situation before the flood, they do seem to, their lives seem to get considerably shorter after the flood. That seems to mean the difference. But as to why these people lived 900 years, I don't know. Except to say that other myths at the time from other areas where they said people lived a long time, they lived thousands of years. So in a sense, these are actually shorter, believe it or not, than other sort of other stories from Babylonian stories and around at the time as well. So they're actually shorter there. What is noticeable though is that with one exception, notice here, that they all very clear, and it says very clearly in very bold terms, that they lived for sort of, they had their child, then they lived for another 500 years or something, and then they died. And I think what the writer of Genesis is trying to get us to see here is that after Adam and Eve committed the sin, okay, not only were they not made as much in God's image as they kind of had been before, but that they all died. And I think it's quite clear to say that death came in then, and that actually mortality is very important. And actually it's important for us that we recognise our mortality. And as we had when we considered the story of Cain and Abel, the fact that kind of rivalry and jealousy is in us, we also need to recognise our own mortality too. I think that's important to recognise. But there is, of course, one exception. There are two people in the Old Testament who don't die. One is Elijah, who gets taken up to fire in a chariot of fire. The other one is Enoch, who's mentioned in here. And it's a lovely picture here. It says that he walked with God and that he did not die, but he was taken by God. And again, I think it's a lovely picture here of somebody walking with God. And I think that's actually something that we can all do. It's like he wasn't just being with God, he was actually walking with God. there's a dynamic there. As he went through his life, as he walked through his life, he walked very closely with God. And I think that's a lovely kind of picture of him. And as a result of that, he escaped death, if you like. He walked with God and was taken by God. And I think there's seeds here of hope for the future. That by walking with God, that's it gives us life, and life in all its fullness. So here you have Enoch, who the one person apart from Elijah in the Old Testament who didn't die, but was taken to heaven by God. So watch how he walked with God. And actually, it's a lovely picture, isn't it? That you and I can walk with God too. But overall, as I say, this genealogy here is really setting us up here for the story of Noah and the ark and so on, which we're going to hear about more in the next 3 or 4 days. So I hope you find that helpful. Do have a look at it again. As I said, it looks on the face of it like a string of names, but notice in verses 1, 2, and 3, the change in the image of God as opposed to Adam and Eve. Notice in here the fact that they all lived a long time, but that they all died. Notice there the mortality. It's important to kind of recognize that as well. And then also here in the middle about Enoch in verses 23 to 24, all about how Enoch walked with God. And I pray, my friends, that you and I can walk with God today. What a lovely thing to put on your headstone, you know. So Ben Whitmore walked with God. Wouldn't that be lovely? My friends, God bless you. Have a lovely day. I hope that's helpful. Do share this message with your friends. Noah's Ark tomorrow. And